My wife and I were doing a cross-country trip from Maryland to Los Angeles, so we were taking I-70 across the country. We would be stopping in Missouri, Colorado, and Utah on the way, then taking the 15 down. We were going to see my cousins in Missouri, but after that we would be in uncharted territory, exploring new places we had never seen. We stopped by St. Louis and saw the Arch and downtown. Then off to St. Charles, where my cousins lived. They had a big family, so it was always a party over there, since my 7 cousins had 5 to 7 kids each. We had dinner at their house, stayed the night, and left the next day. We drove through Kansas, which is really flat. It is so flat that you can't tell if you're going 70 or 100 miles per hour. We got through Kansas and into the Rocky Mountains. And this is where we started having some trouble. I guess a 2009 Prius is not compatible with the Rocky Mountains because I was pedaled to the floor and was only able to get up to 55 miles per hour, and I had to stay in the right lane the whole time. The car was making an intense revving sound, and I was afraid it was going to blow up or something. It was starting to snow, and I was really worried if we were going to make it through the Rockies. Suddenly, my car just shut off, and we had to immediately merge over to the shoulder. It was a good thing we were in the right lane already. Merging over from the left lane could have been catastrophic. I get out and look at the car, but I know nothing about this hybrid. All I know is it won't turn on. I look under the hood, and it looks fine to me, like everything is plugged in. Beyond that, I know nothing about this stuff. I call a tow truck to pick us up. At this point, we're at some small town by Walcott called Edenville at an auto repair shop. The repair guy says he's going to have his electric vehicle guy come by in the morning to check it out and for us to come back in the morning. I guess we were staying here for the night. We look for a hotel and notice that there are flyers all over for a festival tonight. That's cool and all that there's a festival, but we're going to need to find a hotel first. We find one and try to get a room. The woman at the front desk asks if we are in town for the Lunar Festival. We tell her no, and she asks why we decided to stop by on this particular day. We told her our car broke down and that we were on our way to Los Angeles. She gave us a look up and down and told us not to go to the festival, that we would not be interested. We said okay, like we wanted to go anyways, and went to the room. But because of that interaction, we were both now very intrigued about the festival. Why would she tell us not to go? What was going on with that? Night fell on the town, and we had nothing to do. So we ended up following the other townspeople to the festival. I know, right? Once we got there, we saw multiple bonfires and people dancing. There was music, and it seemed to be a fun time. However, the music was interrupted by an announcement from a man on top of a large rock. He was up there pretty high. It was probably about 50 feet or so. He told everyone, "Thank you for coming. The health of our town is all thanks to you all. You are all healthy, and that keeps us to maintain our great traditions. But when you get old and can no longer help, you must take the leap of faith to move on in your journey." Suddenly, an old woman appeared next to him on the rock. She was crying for some reason. He said more stuff about sacrifice, and then suddenly threw the woman off of the rock. My wife and I realized that we had made a big mistake. We started to slowly back away, hoping no one would notice. We managed to get away and took some dark alleys to make it back to the hotel. We saw the same lady at the front desk. She started to question us about where we were just at. We told her we were just out for a walk, and she started to stare at us, trying to figure out if we were full of shit or not. She seemed to be satisfied and backed off, wishing us a good night. We got in the hotel room and locked the door. A few hours went by, and there was a knock at the door. We were not going to answer it, that's for sure. We didn't know anyone in this town, so whoever was knocking at the door was not there for us, or there for a good reason. Come to find out, that didn't matter though. The door was kicked off its hinges, and a group of big guys grabbed us, putting hoods over our head. We found ourselves in the vehicle going somewhere, but couldn't see anything. I told my wife, it's gonna be okay, but I was lying. I knew we were in trouble. We were taken out of the vehicle and walked up a steep incline, with the hood still on our head. We finally stopped, and the hoods were taken off. We were on top of the cliff that we saw from earlier. The crowd was naked for some reason and yelling at us. We had intruded on their ritual and needed to pay. We were thrown from the cliff and died on impact. If someone tells you not to go to a festival in a small town because it's not for you, you might want to listen to them. A few of us were driving to Las Vegas from Ridgecrest and decided we wanted to see Death Valley along the way. So we were all going to drive through Death Valley to get to Vegas, rather than traditional highways. This would have been an exciting trip, if only things didn't go wrong like they did. We get a rental car, a Toyota Camry, and start driving. Plan is to take Highway 178 to Panamint Springs and get on Highway 90 to go through the actual Death Valley Park. Then take Highway 95 to get to Vegas. We started our trip by seeing a sign in Trona for monthly rent at $299. That was amazing, but also, who wants to live out here? Probably not a lot of people. We were driving and saw other cars around, probably looking at some unique desert stuff. We saw some awesome sand dunes along the way, and stopped the car to get a closer look. The dunes were the same ones from Star Wars, come to find out. There were other travelers there as well. We got some great pictures of us walking to the top of a dune peak. After all that, we got back in the car and went further into Death Valley. We started to see plenty of abandoned buildings along the way, probably from the Gold Rush days. I noticed that the amount of cars started to thin out. Signs of civilization were disappearing, and we were starting to lose our cell phone signal. Luckily, we did have a physical map just in case, and we pulled it out to chart our course. The radio was also intermittently coming in, so we turned it off and just started talking. Everything was fine until we saw the radiator temperature was starting to overheat. We did not plan for something like that, but it was 126 degrees outside. We all looked at each other, very concerned. We could either keep going and hopefully it does not overheat, or we could pull over and hope it cools down. Unfortunately, the decision was made for us. Smoke started pouring out of the engine area, and we had to pull over. We came to a stop, and all got out of the car. We surrounded the pulled-up hood and observed the radiator just spewing steam and water. I checked my cell phone, and it was surely not receiving signal. What could we really do? We were out in the middle of nowhere. There was nothing in sight, and it was hotter than I ever could have imagined. We had to find shade. The car was too hot, so we couldn't just stay in there. We wrote a note on the car and told whoever found it that we were going east to find shade and left our numbers just in case. We were walking and talking with each other when I swear I heard someone talking. I told the guys to stop talking for a minute, and we listened. We heard a voice very faintly say, "Sway." We all laughed. We heard something like, "Come this way," but that's impossible and silly. We continued to go down the trail and came across a shack. This would work for now. We could at least escape the heat. We opened the door to the shack, and we were hit with the worst smell ever. The shack was red all over, with flies and maggots on fleshy pieces of something. We looked around for just a minute, and we saw something that resembled a human skull. We looked further and saw a set of ribs, hands, and feet. This was all parts of a human being. We started to back away when we heard a voice from the distance.
Hey, what are you doing here?
We were safe enough as the burly man was pretty far away, but we got scared when we heard footsteps coming quick on the trail that we used to get here. Someone was coming towards us. We ran the opposite way we came and found another shack with the door open. There were a big pile of keys here, and we saw that there were key fobs that looked undamaged. We grabbed a handful and ran out the door. We started hitting the lock button and running around, hoping to hear something. We heard a beep from one of the fobs and ran towards the noise. We ran over the hill where the beeping was coming from, and we saw something disturbing. It was a sea of cars. We saw the car we had the fob for and got in, praying it would start. It started, and there was a half a tank of gas. We floored it and got out of there. On our way out, we passed by a tow truck that had our rental car on it and was headed to the car graveyard. The disfigured man driving the tow truck stared at us all the way out of eyesight. We got back on the road and turned around. We made it back to Ridgecrest and went to the police, telling them what we saw and where. A deputy in the back of the room was quiet for a while. Then he finally said something to break his silence. People go missing out there all the time. I try to tell people, but they just don't listen. Out there, there's no civilization, just survival. You have seen the desert people that live in Death Valley. We hear stories like this. We go out there and try to find them, and find the same thing as always. A bloody shack, a shack with a pile of keys, and a sea of cars. They will relocate and do it again. We can never find them. All you can do is never go out there past stovepipe wells. Take the freeway like a normal person. Josh, Rick, and I were driving through Oklahoma on our way to Phoenix, Arizona. Oklahoma is known for its tornadoes, so of course, fate had decided to give us an experience of a lifetime. No one in our group was from the state, and we had no idea what was about to happen to us. We were on Interstate 40 going towards Weatherford when the weather started turning dark. The normal bright blue sky had a very dark and ominous look with thick clouds coming overhead. There were streaks of lightning and roaring thunder across the landscape. We had heard weather reports of 4 tornadoes descending on our location. We saw one funnel from the distance in front of us. It was a real tornado, and this was getting way too crazy. I asked Josh if I should pull over at the next rest stop, but he looked over to where the rest stop was, and he saw an even bigger tornado over there, heading right for it. He told me just to stay on the road, and hopefully the tornado in front of us would change course. It was far enough away. There was a loud roaring sound that was getting closer and closer to our location. The thunder was crashing, and the lightning was continuously flashing like a strobe light. It was overwhelming, but I had to keep myself engaged as we were directly in the middle of 4 tornadoes. The tornado in front of us was not changing course. I told Josh, and he agreed. We saw an exit with a bridge ahead we could hide under. From the air fell a tractor right in front of us. I swerved to miss it. There was debris everywhere. I saw the exit and pulled off. We all jumped out of the car and got under the bridge. We heard the roars of a freight train descending upon us. I saw our car get pulled backwards and leave the ground. It was engulfed by those extreme winds that are now right on top of us. We all hung onto something as tight as we could. The wind picked us up, and our feet were flying through the air. We just had to hold on long enough to get through this. The wind slowed down finally. Our feet returned to the ground. We had survived, and now we knew that tornadoes were an Oklahoma thing. Our car was gone, but we had our lives, and that's really all that matters. We got a rental car and made it to Arizona eventually. If you're in a strange location, Pay attention to what the location is known for. You might just find out in a surprising way. I had decided I was going to start a game resale business on OfferUp. I had seen channels like Phoenix Resale and thought I could do the same thing. So I started hunting for good deals on retro games. I did find a copy of Code Veronica for the GameCube for like $20 and resold it for $150. After that I thought, this is really working. I did find some deal on PS2 game lots, but the discs were all scratched up. I did some research and was able to resurface the discs and flip a significant profit. I had probably done 30 sales until I had an obstacle, and it was a major one. The situation finally made me quit the resale business. So I got a lead on 2 PS2 games, Rule of Roses and Haunting Ground, both in mint condition. These titles sell for upwards of $500 each, so I was drooling over adding these titles to my collection. When the offer popped up on my screen, both for $100, I was over the moon. I could make $900 in no time, guaranteed. I just had to get them. Most of the time, a deal this good is going to have some significant damage to the discs. However, there were pictures posted of the disc condition, and they looked to be in perfect condition with perfect cases and manuals. It was a real score for sure. So I immediately contacted the seller and scheduled a meetup that day. The seller sends me the coordinates, and I'm on the way. I gave him a description of what I was driving while I was thinking about it before I got on the road and forgot. I was just so excited. It was a 60-mile trip, which sucks, but it'll be worth it. I'm about 10 miles away, and they would have to postpone the meeting for 3 hours. Oh great, I thought. So I just finished the drive anyways and get to town. What am I going to do for 2 hours and 40 minutes? I find a restaurant and get some food. While I'm sitting there, I'm cruising on OfferUp and find another stack of gems. While I'm eating in this town in the middle of nowhere, I message another seller of rare retro goodness. They give me an address and it's right around the corner. I finish up my food and get in the car. I get to the new seller's house and score a whole bunch of stuff for nothing, including Rule of Rose and Haunting Grounds. This trip was totally worth it. So I have everything I wanted, but I have less than 30 minutes to meet the original seller. So being greedy, I decide to wait. If I had 2 copies of Rule of Rose and Haunting Grounds, I could make double the money. The seller contacts me and says he's ready, but he gives me a different address. I get in my car and go. I knock on the door and the seller greets me, an older man that probably knows nothing about the things he's selling, which is what I like as a reseller. I walk a few steps in and suddenly get knocked in the back of the head with a pipe. I never saw it coming. I wake up in a bathtub of ice and feel terrible. I have a lot of pain in my stomach. I lift up my shirt and see stitches in my skin. Oh my God. I have my immediate thoughts of what had just happened. I get out of the tub extremely groggy and freezing cold. I stumble out of the house I was in and wander around. After a while, I found my car luckily, with my keys sitting on the seat. All the games were gone that I picked up from Seller 1. It had to be like $10,000 worth of games that I paid $1,000 for, and now I had nothing to show for it. Luckily, I had my wallet and my keys. I got in my car and drove back to the city. I went immediately to the doctor, and my worst fears were realized. They had taken one of my kidneys. I told the police what happened. They looked for the seller accounts, both of them, and they were gone. I should have left while I had the chance, but I got greedy. When you have a good deal, be happy. You don't want to be left with less than you were hoping for. And I was WTWL, which means watching TikTok while driving. Maybe I shouldn't do stuff like that, but it has become a habit. No matter what, I need to pay more attention to what I'm doing. I guess I've just become bored with life and just have been complacent while driving, thinking that nothing was going to happen to me. However, something happened one night that made me change my ways. While I was half driving and watching TikTok, a car came into my lane and was coming right towards me. I did not notice and continued to drive forward, unknowingly right towards some headlights. The car was far, and I could not see the headlights beaming into my face quite yet. I looked up at the last minute and saw the car coming right at me. I was able to swerve at the very last second to avoid a head-on collision. Unfortunately, the oncoming car got enough of my car to send me spinning out of control. After a while, my car finally stopped spinning. I was in shock and my car was totaled, but luckily, I wasn't injured. However, as I was sitting in the car waiting for the police to arrive, I noticed a figure walking towards me. The figure coming towards me looked like some kind of monster out of a horror movie. The figure was covered in blood, and their face was almost completely destroyed. They reached out towards me with their hands, as if they were trying to grab me, and I screamed and scrambled out of the car. I got some distance between me and the monster. At that point, I realized it was no monster, but a person injured very badly. I put two and two together and realized that it was the driver from the other car. He got out of his car and was coming towards me, trying to get help. I called for an ambulance immediately. The man was taken to the hospital and treated for multiple injuries. He was able to survive. When the police questioned me about why I took so long to swerve out of the way, I confessed that I had been watching TikTok while I was driving. He laughed. I said, "Why are you laughing? This is not a good time for that." He said the other guy was watching TikTok as well and wasn't paying attention to where he was going. That's why he swerved into your lane. Tragically, the guy's mistake caused him to have permanent damage all over his body, and he almost killed me. I stopped watching TikTok. I stopped watching things while I drive after that and never did it again. Humans can't really multitask, even if we think we can. When you're driving, concentrate on driving. You never know when something bad could happen. It was late one night, and I was driving home from a friend's house, and it was raining heavily. The roads were slick with water, and visibility was foggy and low. A fog layer had descended on the road, and it was extremely difficult to see anything. As I was driving, I suddenly heard a loud bang and felt the wheel jerk out of my hand. My car hit a deep pothole, and I lost control completely. I tried to regain control of the steering wheel, but it was too late. The car careened off the road and into a ditch. I was terrified, and my heart was racing. I was stuck in the car and couldn't move. Suddenly, I heard a knock on my window. It was another driver who had seen the accident and called for help. The man helped me out of the car. I was shaken up pretty bad and felt sore. I don't know what was hurt, but I could see blood in my car. It must have been coming out of me somewhere, but I couldn't tell where it was coming from. The man that saw the accident asked me basic questions about my age, height, weight, things like that. He said it was to pass to the EMT personnel when they showed up, which made a lot of sense to me. So I told him. Clutching my stomach in pain, I tried to answer the questions. Suddenly, something changed with this guy. The questions became really disturbing. He asked me when I lost my virginity, and if I preferred to be a top or a bottom. I'm sitting there bleeding, and he's asking me some pretty intrusive questions. I started not to answer his questions anymore, or at least let it drag out. After a while of sitting on the side of the road, I started to wonder where the ambulance was. I pulled my phone out to call myself when the man slapped the phone out of my hand. I knew then that he had not called the police or an ambulance at all. How did I get so lucky, I thought. I jumped up despite the pain and ran after my phone. I got it. It was cracked, but still functional. The man chased after me, and I was able to get a surprise hit right into his throat, sending him to the ground. I ran into the woods and called the police. Eventually, the police and EMTs arrived. I told them what happened and what the man did after the accident. It turns out that the man had seen the Ted Bundy documentary and was inspired to carry on his legacy. He even had purchased a Volkswagen Beetle that he drove around to really get into his role. The police found a jackhammer in the back of the car. With that jackhammer, he had created a large pothole for someone to drive into and just waited for someone to come along. I was the lucky one. They arrested him and put him in jail for attempted kidnapping. Pay extra attention when driving in a storm. Something as small as a pothole can send your car out of control. One night, I was driving home from an AA meeting. I was a self-referral, and I'm lucky I'm still able to drive. I had not ever drank and drive, but drinking has kept me in the house a lot, and I've missed a lot of opportunities hanging out with others that I could have experienced if sober. So I actually go to AA meetings for the help. It was a dark and stormy night, with heavy rains and strong winds. As I was driving, I suddenly heard a loud noise from the back of my car. I looked into the rearview mirror and didn't see anything, but I felt a shuffling in my car, and I noticed that my tire had blown out. I panicked and pulled over to the side of the road. As I was going for the handle to get out of my car to change the tire, I heard a loud knock on my window. I turned to the window and saw a man standing there, soaked from the rain and looking very menacing. I think he was drunk. As I got out, I looked at the guy. I went over to get the stuff for my tire and lay it all out so I could fix it. I tried to ignore the man and focused on changing my tire, but he kept trying to talk to me. He demanded that I give him a ride. I told him, okay, but I have to change the tire first, and then I could give him a ride, but he would just have to wait. Suddenly, he pulled out the biggest knife I had ever seen. I was terrified and I had no idea what to do. I jumped back in the car and locked all the doors. I pulled out my phone. I called 911 and explained the situation to the operator. They told me to stay in the car and lock the doors until they arrived. I did as they instructed, locking all the doors and waiting anxiously for the police to arrive. Outside the car, the guy was getting pissed. He started to bang on the windows really hard. The joke's on him, though. Like an idiot at the time that I bought the car, I had gone for this ballistic glass option, thinking I was going to get shot at or something. Well, who's dumb now? The guy can bang as hard as he wants on the window, but he's not getting through. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, the police arrived and arrested the man. I was relieved and grateful to be safe, but that was definitely one of the most scary driving experiences I've ever had. When buying a car, go for the ballistic glass option. It might just save your life. It was really late when I pulled into the desolate gas station off the highway in the middle of nowhere. The flickering fluorescent lights barely illuminated the dirty building and oil-stained concrete. As I saw this, I shuddered at the thought of spending any more time in this creepy place than I had to. Pulling up to the pump, I looked around my general area, feeling paranoid, but did not see anyone around me. I quickly fueled up and realized I didn't have my credit card. I only had cash, so I had to go inside and pay. The cashier, a thin man with greasy hair and a creepy smile, seemed to be staring at me with a disgusting vibe. He was giving me looks up and down, and it was obvious. I just want to get my gas, and I want this guy to stop being the worst man on the planet. I paid as quickly as possible and tried to make my escape, but as I tried to open the door, I noticed something strange. The doors to the convenience store were locked. I tried to push them open, but they wouldn't budge. Panic set in as I turned to the cashier for help, but he only chuckled and continued to stare at me with the same sinister smile. "What's going on here?" I demanded, trying to keep the fear out of my voice. "Oh, nothing much," the cashier replied in a smug tone. "I just like to keep my customers here a little bit longer. It's more fun that way." I could feel my heart pounding in my chest as I tried to come up with a plan. I remembered my cell phone in my pocket and fumbled to dial 911, but the cashier was too quick for me. He lunged at me, knocking the phone out of my hand and sending it skidding across the floor. I backed up against a wall, trying to keep my distance from the crazed man in front of me, but it was too late. The last thing I saw was the glint of a knife before everything went black. When I woke up, I was tied to a chair in a dingy back room of the gas station. The cashier stood over me, still smiling that sinister smile. "Welcome to my little game," he whispered. "You will be here for a while, just like all the others." I closed my eyes and prayed for a miracle, knowing that I may never make it out of this creepy gas station alive. As my eyes were closed, he took his knife and cut the rope from my hands. I was confused, but then he turned out the lights and started hunting me. I knew I didn't have much time and needed to develop an escape plan fast. The good news is that I have some pepper spray in my bag. I got it out and waited quietly. I also grabbed a rock that I found under the shelf I was hiding behind. I heard his heavy breathing coming closer to me. He must have smoked 2 packs of cigarettes a day and couldn't help but breathe heavy. He came around the corner of the shelf to the aisle I was hiding in. He saw me and ran directly at me. I smashed a rock over his head and pepper sprayed him in the face. I pushed him down to the ground and grabbed his keys. I unlocked the door and got in my car. I was able to get away successfully. The next time I get gas, I'm going to a more public location. Be careful of getting gas at night. You don't know if the threat could be outside or inside the gas station. It was a dark night, and I was driving down a deserted highway, trying to get home as quickly as possible. I had been on the road for hours, and my stomach was growling with hunger. Just as I was about to give up hope on finding a place to eat, I spotted a dimly lit gas station off in the distance. I pulled into the station, relieved to finally have a place to rest and grab something to eat. As I walked into the convenience store, I was immediately struck by how empty and abandoned it seemed. The lights were flickering, and there was a thick layer of dust on everything. I made my way to the back of the store, hoping to find some chips or candy to munch on. As I reached for a bag of chips, I heard a strange noise behind me. I turned around and saw a figure standing in the shadows, watching me with cold, dead eyes. I froze, unsure what to do. The figure seemed to be beckoning me closer, but something about it made me feel uneasy. I was not trusting whatever it was. My instincts told me to run, but my legs were shaking too much to move. Suddenly, the figure lunged at me. I screamed and stumbled backwards, tripping over a stack of chips and falling to the ground. I scrambled to my feet and ran for the door, my heart pounding in my chest. As I burst out of the store, I saw a car parked in the lot. I ran towards it, hoping to find someone inside that could help me. But as I approached the car, I saw that the driver was the same figure that had chased me in the store. I turned and ran the opposite direction, my legs pumping as fast as they could go. I could hear the figure gaining on me. Its labored breathing echoed in my ears. Just as I thought I was about to be caught, I saw a pair of headlights in the distance. I ran towards them, waving my arms frantically. The car slowed to a stop, and I threw myself inside, sobbing with relief. As I caught my breath, I looked over at the driver, expecting to see a kind stranger who had come to my rescue. But to my horror, the driver was the same figure that had chased me in the gas station. I screamed and tried to open the door, but it was locked. The figure turned to me and spoke in a voice that was both familiar and terrifying. And with that, the figure drove off into the night, leaving me trapped in the back seat with the doors locked, with me wondering what was about to happen. I was on my way home from a late shift at my restaurant job. I had been driving for a while, and I was starting to get tired, so I decided to stop at a gas station I saw to fill up my tank and get a coffee. As I pulled into the station, I noticed that it looked a little run down and abandoned. There were 2 cars parked there, so someone was there at least. The overhead lights were dim, and some were burned out, and there didn't seem to be anyone around. There was a neon sign in the window that said open. Still, I was desperate for a caffeine fix, so I got out of my car and made my way towards the door. As I entered the station, I was immediately struck by how cold and damp it felt inside. The air was heavy and stagnant, and there was a strange smell that I couldn't quite place. I tried to ignore it and headed straight for the coffee machine, but as I reached for a cup, I heard a faint whisper coming from the corner of the room. I froze, listening intently. The whisper was barely audible, but I could make out a few words here and there. "Help me," it seemed to say. "I'm trapped here." I turned to see who was speaking, but no one was there. I looked around the room, but it was empty except for me and the cashier. I couldn't explain it, but I felt a sense of dread wash over me. I asked the cashier if he heard a noise. He said, "No," but he looked at me with a questionable demeanor. I was starting to think that someone was actually trapped, and the cashier knew something. I didn't want to say any more, but I wanted to get some distance and call the police to check it out. I quickly grabbed my coffee and headed back to my car, trying to shake off the feeling of disgust. If he really had kidnapped someone, he was a terrible human being. As I drove off, I called the police and told them what I had experienced. A squad investigated the gas station and called me back a few hours later. They put a woman on the phone named Ruthie. She thanked me for calling the cops. Ruthie had pulled into the same gas station about 15 minutes prior to me. She had been ambushed by the cashier and was tied up and hidden in the back of the store. It was just blind luck that I was able to hear her and get out of there and call the police. If you hear a cry for help in the distance, make sure you answer the call. Testing, testing. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. I knew I didn't have much time and needed to develop I scrambled to my feet and ran for the door, my heart panting. So I decided to stop at a gas station, and it was just luck that I was able to hear her and get her out of there. It was just blind luck that I was able to get... Shoot. You don't want to go into a deal and be left with less than you had. You don't want to be left. It was a brand new PS5 with like 10 exclusive, all new and wrapped. It was a brand new PS5 with 10 exclusives. This is a fresh Ugh. They had been using the app. As I continued, as it looked like it would be perfect for him. I pulled over and messaged the seller. I quickly pulled over and messaged the seller. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. I sit back with this pack of zigzags in this bag, and this weed didn't need to be on this earth, and since birth I've been cursed to just curse and just curse and just start to berserk and bizarre shit that works in itself in the hells. We heard the roars of the freight. We told her that we were just out for a walk, and there's nothing going on. We were taken out of the vehicle and walked up a steep incline with the bag still over our heads. We finally stopped. We were taken out of the vehicles. We were thrown from the cliff. A few of us were driving. 6 were driving to Las Vegas from Ridgecrest. So we were driving and saw other cars around. Oops. Signs of civil. We had heard weather reports of. We had heard. But he looked over to where the rest stop was, and he saw even bigger. But he looked over where the rest stop. But he looked over to where the rest stop was, and he saw an even bigger tornado. But he looked over to where the west stop.